Hi, this is Doug from Dynamic Computing, and welcome to episode 30 of 10-Minute Amiga Retrocast. This week, I want to concentrate on basic Amiga OS tutorials. I've noticed over the past several months that there have been a lot of people who are getting back into the Amiga scene, finding them up in their attics after 25 years and getting back into it, and they have some questions about how to do things, how things were done, because you forget after 25 years. And there's also a subset of people that are just now getting into the Amiga hobby, and we welcome them with open arms, but there needs to be some way that they can learn a little bit more about the Amiga and what it can do. So I thought I'd create a series of tutorials that start at the beginning to learn more about the Amiga operating system and how it works. Now, the Amiga OS has always been a powerful operating system from day one. Now, the first versions of the Amiga OS were great for the day. For instance, Amiga OS 1.2 and 1.3 with the classic blue screen and orange highlights. They were great in the day. But where Amiga OS really took off is with 2.0, which shipped with the Amiga 3000, and then later on with Amiga OS 3.0, which added things like AGA support for the newer Amigas. Now, Amiga OS 3.1, which was the last official Commodore Amiga operating system, added some great things like retargetable graphics support, better data type support, which I'll go over in a few minutes. After that, Amiga OS 3.5 and 3.9 were brought out by the new owners of the Amiga OS licenses. They came out in the early 2000s, maybe late 90s, early 2000s. Now, I'm not really going to cover those features now, but they added some more modern support for things, but I won't cover those in these episodes. And most recently, Amiga OS 3.1.4 came out, still in kind of a legal limbo, but it's a great operating system. It takes the core of Amiga OS 3.1 and a lot of the advanced features that were added into Amiga OS 3.9, brings them together in a more stable and more modern operating system. I hope they get all the legal ramifications figured out soon, but in the meantime, snap it up, buy it, get the ROMs, get the software, buy them legally, and try that on your system. It's a fantastic operating system. But I've already covered a lot of Amiga OS 3.1.4 in other videos, which I will put little links to up here, and they'll also be in the description. So in this one, we're going to stick with Amiga OS 3.1, which is what a lot of people are going to start out with. Now today, we're going to be using my original Amiga 500 from 1987. This is the one that I got my first Amiga years ago. I've since upgraded it with the ACA 500 Plus. So this little beauty has a 68,000 processor running at 42 megahertz. It's got a total of about 9 megabytes of RAM. It's 2 megs of chip RAM. I have a mega chip in there, which gives it 2 megabytes of chip RAM. And it also has 7 megabytes of fast RAM. And I've also upgraded this little guy from OCS, that's original chipset, to ECS, that's enhanced chipset, which gives a few graphics modes that are not going to be available on some of the oldest Amigas that are out there, but I'll point that out as we get to it. But for now, let's take a closer look at the screen. Now, once you boot your system up into Workbench, you'll generally be presented with your Workbench disk icon. It could have a different name than that. Your RAM disk icon. And if you have a floppy disk inserted, you might see an icon for that too. Let's put a floppy in and you'll see it pop right up. And just like that, the Amiga will read the floppy and put an icon for it. If we take the floppy out, it immediately removes the icon. Helps keep clutter down. Now, Workbench is your main boot partition. It contains all of the appropriate files to boot your Amiga either from floppy or better yet from a hard drive or CF card. The RAM icon represents the file stored in RAM of your computer. The Amiga is fairly unique in that it can use its RAM to store files of any type, just like it was a hard disk, and you can use and manipulate these files very quickly and easily. The RAM disk is often used to store files that you can decompress for later installation. The contents of RAM will be lost if you reboot or shut off your computer. Now, you can also create what's called a RAD drive. It's possible to create a recoverable RAM disk that will save whatever's in that RAM disk even through a reboot of your computer. It disappears if it's shut off, but it will stay there for a reboot, and you can theoretically use it to boot from that RAD drive. The RAM and the RAD drives are limited by the size of the RAM in your system. If you have a few megabytes available, they will be useful, but on an unexpanded Amiga, if you just have 512K or 1 megabyte, they're going to be of limited use. Now let's take a look at a few of the menus on your Amiga. Now, the first thing you're going to notice is that the right mouse button does something completely different than a right mouse button on a Windows system. Holding down the right mouse button activates these menus at the top of the screen. Let's take a look at the first menu, Workbench. Now, one of the first things you may notice with a new installation is that it appears that Workbench shows up as just a little movable window. I personally like Workbench to show up full screen. Put a little check mark next to that backdrop icon, and now you have a full screen Workbench. The next menu item we want to look at is Execute Command, which is just like the Run command in Windows. If you choose Execute Command, you get a little command line here, and you can type in whatever you want it to do. So in this case, if I want to list the contents of my C folder, I just type list C : it'll bring up a list of the contents of my C folder. About will tell you the version of Kickstart and Workbench that you're using. In this case, it's Amiga OS 3.1 that I'm using here. When we open up the RAM disk, let's make sure that we've selected this window by clicking on the window. And you see when you click on it, it changes color to show you've selected it. We're going to right click, choose Window, and now we're going to take a look at some of our options. We can create new folders. In this case, they call them drawers, a new drawer. We can give it a name. We're going to call this RAM Disk Test. Now, we've created an actual folder inside of the RAM on the Amiga that will act just like a file or a folder in Windows or in the Mac operating system. Select Contents will select everything in the window. So if we have two different drawers here and we want to work with both of them, we can do Select Contents, and it shows that it selects both of them. Now, you can do this in other ways too. You can also click with the left mouse button, drag a marquee around the contents, and it will select both contents. Or you can hold down the Shift key and click each one in turn, and it will select multiple items. You may also have noticed that these menu items often have a name of a key, a shortcut key, right next to them. And what you can do is you can hold down the right Amiga key and you can choose the letter next to it, and it will do that item. Like right Amiga A selects the contents, right Amiga K will close a folder, right Amiga N will create a new drawer. So in this case, let's do right Amiga N, boom, new drawer. Now we want to close this window down, right Amiga K closes it down. So you can have some nice little keyboard shortcuts for these little guys. Next, we're going to take a look at Clean Up. What that does is it takes all of the folders and files in a particular window and it puts them in nice, neat little rows. So let's say, for example, we have unnamed 1, unnamed 2, and RAM disk, and they're just kind of scattered around on here. We can right click, we can choose Clean Up, and it puts them in a nice little line. Now, if we close this window down and reopen it, they're all higgledy-piggledy again. They're just wherever they want to be, okay? So let's clean it up again, but this time right-click, snapshot, window will remember the size of the window that you've created here. So for example, if I want to make this window that size right there, and I do window, snapshot window, it's going to remember the size of the window, but not the placement of the icons. See, I reopen it, they're all higgledy-piggledy again. Clean up. So what I want to do is snapshot all. What that does, it now remembers the placement of your icons. And this works not just in the RAM disk, that works with floppies, hard drives, whatever. So now when we open this up, nice, neat, clean, and tidy. So you're going to want to do that once you start placing things how you like on your Workbench disk, on your work disk, whatnot. You're going to want to tell Workbench to remember the placement of them so you don't have to change it every time you log into your Amiga. Now, this next one is key here. Let's open up our Workbench folder. Normally, all you're going to see when you open up a Workbench window are the files that have corresponding icon files. So there's an actual program called clock on here. Then there's an actual file that's called clock.info that tells the Amiga OS to show an icon. But you can see any kind of file you want to. You don't have to go into the shell to do it. What you do is you open up your Windows and you go to Window, Show, either Only Icons or All Files. And if you notice, when I did that, it allows me to scroll to the right and see all of these previously hidden files. Many of these are important system files like libraries. This is where we store your fonts. This is where we store AREX commands. This is where we store most of the actual system executable files that we use in the background. They're normally hidden. So I'm going to go Show Only Icons. They're gone. Show All Files. There they are. Okay, now we can go in here and take a look at all of the different files. Now, if it does not have a corresponding icon, it just gives this little graphical representation of the tool here. It is absolutely possible to create real icons for any of these folders or any of these files. And I will show you in the next episode when we get into the shell how we can do that. Usually not necessary, but there are times when it is really nice. Where you're really going to find this is important is when you end up transferring things from another computer, like your PC or your Mac, and bring it over to your Amiga, say on a compact flash card. Because of the way that PCs work, they're not going to create info files. So oftentimes you're going to want to show all files. See, there's all these extra files that I've either created on my PC or copied over. Now we can take these and drag and drop them over to the Amiga. For example, here's hamrun.aga or hamaga.run. We can go onto my compact flash card. I did show all files. We can drag and copy it onto my RAM drive. Now if we go to the RAM drive, we do show all files. There's hamaga.run that I just copied over. Another useful option in the Windows menu is View By. Normally it's by icon, but we can also choose View By Name. So now it shows us a list of the name of the file. That's kind of useful. These still work normally, so you can click them and it goes right into those particular folders. We can show by date. Now it will resort them by the date. View by size. It's also important to know that if you really like to view your system like this, where you're viewing kind of the list view, you can very easily go up and do Window, Snapshot All, and it's going to remember that from now until the end of time, that every time you open up your Workbench window, it's going to open it up in this view. Let's go back into the RAM disk where we've been playing with a few files here, and into our Icons menu. You'll notice a lot of the things in here are grayed out. or ghosted out as they call them, because we've not selected any icons. These will generally only work when we select an icon. For example, here's RAM disk test. I've selected the icon. You see it's changed its shape. Now I can open the icon, copy, rename, get information, take a snapshot of that specific icon. So for example, there, open. It opens the icon. Let's do rename, RAM disk, Boogaloo. Okay, now it's RAM disk Boogaloo. We don't like that. We can right click. We can delete RAM disk Boogaloo. Warning, you cannot get back what you delete. Okay to delete? Yes. And you generally can't get back what you delete, not easily. You want to copy something? Let's say we've got some stuff inside of unnamed 2 here. We're going to copy. Now I've got copy of unnamed 2. All right. Now we can take that folder we just copied, rename it, put it someplace else, put it on our compact flash card, copy it to a floppy, whatever we want to do. Information. This one is very, very useful. Let's go to Tools, Commodities. Here we go. And we'll talk about commodities in a minute. Select our icon, information, and you'll see under tool types here, there are different options that are available to change that exact program by changing the things inside of the icon. In this case, it's saying don't wait for this commodity, don't wait for this program, just let it do its thing in the background. Give it a priority of 0. Allow left Alt to activate that particular program. I'll explain what that means in a minute. You can also create new qualifiers or new tool types just by clicking New. And if it means something to the icon, it will actually be used. We'll just go ahead and delete that one. You can also put just a comment here. And you would just do that for your own sake. It doesn't really do anything. You can increase what's called the stack size of your programs. Click Save. Now, anytime we go in and look at the info of that, it's going to remember what we did here. Put our comment Hello World on there. So being able to access the information for your icons can be very important. Let's look at put away and leave out. Let's say we use our calculator on a regular basis in our tools folder. We can left click, drag this out, and now calculator is put on the desktop. But what's going to happen is next time we reboot the Amiga, calculator goes back in its little magic tool folders and stays there, okay? What we want to do is move calculator out to the desktop here, the workbench, icons, leave out, and it tells the Amiga, okay, every time you reboot, leave the calculator program out on the desktop. This way, programs that you access on a regular basis, you can just make a little list of them here on the side and tell it to leave the icons out. They're always going to be there for easy and quick access. When we're tired of looking at them, select it, icon, put away, and it puts it back where it belongs. Here's an important one here. Format disk. Let's say we put a floppy in here, and the floppy disk will show up here in a second. Let's say we wanted to format that floppy. If you select it, go to Icons and Format Disk, it gives you the option to format this floppy disk. You can give it a name here, put in a trash can, which does not work like a trash can or the recycle bin. So very seldom do we really use that. Tell it to use fast file system, not necessarily in a floppy, international mode, directory cache. These you don't normally need for floppies, but you may use them for a hard disk. Format takes about a minute. Quick format takes about 5 seconds, and it will format the entire capacity of the specific disk. You can also format hard drives like this. Like in this case, my Workbench is a 64 megabyte CF card, just a little tiny thing, literally megabytes, not gigabytes. You can reformat things like your hard drive or your flash drives right here too. Now this would be silly of me to do because I'd erase this particular Workbench disk, but you can do it. And you see in this case, international mode, fast file system are chosen, and we could choose to format the disk right from here. Now let's go back in and take a look at some of these items in this Workbench drive, which is a very important folder. The Utilities folder has a couple of important things. Multi-view is a utility that allows you to view things like text files and graphic files. So if we choose multi-view and we want to open up this text file I'd created, we select the text file, open, and it shows us this little text file, which is basically just a directory listing that I created. You can also use this for opening some graphic images, some audio images, IFF files, things like that. Let me show you an example here. We'll launch multi-view. Volumes represents the drives on your computer. So we click volumes, we can see my floppy disk, the RAM drive, and here's my XFIR, which is my CF card that I keep a lot of stuff in. And let's just find a nice little picture on here. A little 16 color image. And there we go. Let's see how it does it. It's going to try and open up the file, multi-view will. There it is. Now I'm on a 4-color Workbench, so it doesn't do a particularly lovely job of transferring that, but it absolutely opens up the IFF file right on my Workbench screen. The next folder is the System folder. Now this carries some very important things, including the shell, which we're going to go over in depth in the next episode. Basically, this is the same as a DOS prompt or a command prompt in Windows and is incredibly useful. When I'm doing day-to-day things on my Amigas, I usually probably spend maybe 30 to 40% of time in the actual shell or the CLI, the command line interface, in order to move things, copy things, access things. The clock program, it's exactly what you would suspect it is. Format, that's going to bring up another way to format devices. Instead of just going through the drop-down menu, if we choose any of these, it comes up with the same screen that we were looking at a minute ago, the format screen. It's just a different way of going around it. RexMast we'll get into a little later in another episode. It's a scripting language that's included with Amiga OS. Fix fonts, this one will go through and just literally fix the fonts on your system. If there's a problem or you've added new fonts, it basically just updates its settings. No fast mem, you're not going to use this a lot. This used to be used for some programs and games that could not deal with fast memory that you see up there. I say I've got about 6.3 megs free. If I click no fast mem, boom, that extra memory's gone. Now I'm dealing with a 2 megabyte Amiga. Now I get to reboot it to bring it back. Next, let's take a look in the devs folder. This is a critical folder. You're not necessarily going to be spending time in here or executing programs from within here, but it's a critical folder. Data types. I mentioned to you a few minutes ago that multi-view will open up various types of files. The types of files that it can handle are handled as data types, which means basically it interprets a particular file and allows the Amiga to generate a picture of it or generate that file. 8SVX is a sound file, animation, CDXL is an animation format, ILBM is a standard Amiga IFF graphics file, Amiga Guide is a standard way that documentation is created on Amigas, which we'll go over in another episode. And here's a text reading utility. Now, if I wanted to add data types to open up JPEG files, I can download that from AmiNet, put a JPEG translator in here. Now my Amiga can display JPEGs on the desktop. Next one is DOS drivers. You'll seldom go into here. Sometimes if you add a piece of hardware to your Amiga, it will put a file in DOS drivers just so it knows how to deal with a particular kind of file or a particular program. Key maps, this is where it's going to store your different key maps for your different kinds of keyboards. Monitors, this one's critical. This is how the Amiga is able to handle all kinds of different resolutions and different modes, is by what's in your monitor folder. Now, if you have an original Amiga with an OCS chipset, the original chipset, you're going to be able to, use NTSC or PAL or some of the basic screen modes. If you've got the enhanced chipset like my Amiga 500 has, or any of the AGA Amigas, you can use some of these better resolution displays like double NTSC, which doubles the vertical size, double PAL, special multi-scan, which will, honest to goodness, let your Amiga 500 with an enhanced chipset display on a regular, average, everyday 31.5 kilohertz VGA monitor. Printers, this is where you're going to have, if you've got an HP LaserJet, something like that, this is where your printer drivers will end up going. There are also, show all files, lots of other files in this devs folder. System configuration, serial device, this is how it controls the serial port, how it controls the parallel port, how it controls the hard drive, clipboard, things like that. Back-end device drivers is a good way to think of that. If you add a custom SCSI controller or a custom IDE controller, chances are it's going to put a .device file and put it in your devs folder. Don't delete anything from the devs folder unless you know what you're doing. If you think something should be in your devs folder but you can't find it, chances are it's in storage. Open up storage. Look at that. It's kind of an exact copy of what devs look like. See, it's got the same kind of folders in it. Storage is where the Amiga puts extra files. So if we look under printers here, see, there's all the printers that you're not using. All of those things would go into your storage folder if they're not currently being used. Now let's take a look at our tools folder. Lots of useful stuff here. Calculator, that's pretty self-explanatory. Icon editor, this is cool because you can open up any icon on the system. So let's say we want to change our calculator icon. We load up calculator.info. There's the calculator icon. Now we can make some changes here, like we want to put a big circle here and we want to put a big X there, and there's a plus and there's a minus, and we're going to save it. Take a look at my calculator icon. Right there, instantly, it's got all of my little symbols that I just put on there, and now I got to clean all that up. But so you can edit any of these icons anytime you want on the system and make them look any way you want to. Emacs, Micro Emacs, this is a very powerful text editor. So if you want to, say, do some coding, some basic coding, some C coding, something like that, and you want to use a text editor for it, Emacs is actually a pretty good text editor. Key show, this is helpful. This shows all of the different keys on the Amiga keyboard and what holding down different keys will allow you to access. So example, if I choose Alt, I can access those keys, and it gives me the option of showing me what keys there are. HD Toolbox, this is going to allow you to look at the hard drives that are on your computer or your CF cards and allow you to make changes to those, to partition them, to delete partitions, create new partitions. Now the next thing we want to look at here is Show Config. This will show you the configuration of your existing computer. In this case, I've got a 68,000 processor in there. I'm using an enhanced chipset, NTSC, Agnes, enhanced chipset, Denise, which kickstart, how much RAM I have and where, and which boards I have in the machine. You'll use that maybe for troubleshooting things. If something's not working, you can take a look here and see how everything's configured. Now this is an important folder. This is called commodities. And what commodities are is they are programs that are used by the Amiga to add features to the Amiga. You can think of them like in the old DOS days as terminate and stay resident programs. You can think of them in modern terms as something in your startup folder in Windows, okay? Click to front will allow you, instead of relying on these gadgets here to move your windows backwards and forwards, you can literally just click right on the anywhere in the screen in order to bring a window forward. Mouse blanker will blank the mouse when it's not in use. Auto point automatically tries to move the mouse to new windows you open. Cross DOS is related to transferring files between MS-DOS. Turn off caps lock key, turn on a screen blanker. The way that these work is you take these programs and you put them in the Workbench startup folder. See how I'm just dragging them down there? Let's see, which other ones do I like? That's really the only one that I like. So now I have this in my Workbench startup. When I reboot my computer, this will activate. I'm going to activate it manually by double clicking on it. So now you see what I can do is double click anywhere in one of these windows, and now it brings the window to the front, where before I was really limited to only using these gadgets, these tools to move things around. So those are very useful. The other one that I find very useful is one you can download called No-Click. As you're probably aware, if you have no disk in your Amiga drive, it will tend to click the drive every few seconds. Click, click, click. It gets really annoying as it's seeking for a floppy in there. The No-Click Pro commodity that you can download virtually eliminates that clicking. So that's very useful. You also, in these commodities, we go into information, you can change settings for these commodities. Like in this case, qualifier equals left alt means that I have to hold down the left alt key when I click in these windows in order for the commodity to be active. I could also remove that qualifier, delete, no qualifier. Now when I activate the program, it no longer needs me to hold down a button in order to activate click to front. I'm just clicking on the windows here, double clicking them, and it's bringing them to the front. Very, very useful. Commodities are very useful. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of them available that can do various things. Now the most important folder of all is going to be the prefs folder. This is the last one I'm going to be going into. Inside prefs, you can think of it like control panel or the system preferences on a PC or on a Mac. This is where you're going to control your computer. In this case, we can change our default fonts for Workbench, for the screen. We can use different types of fonts, different sizes. Locale changes where you are in the world and changes your time zone. I'm in Arizona, so I'm 7 hours from GMT. Pointer will allow you to physically change your pointer, just like I physically changed my icon a few minutes ago. You can change it also to anything you want. If you want your pointer to be a big smiley face or, middle finger, whatever you want to do, have fun with it. PostScript printer options, change sound options on your Amiga. It will allow you to play back a sound anytime there's an error made. Eye control is useful. Screen dragging, which I'll show you in a second. You can have it where you can hold down an Amiga key or another key to activate screen drags. Overscan, this is important. The screen mode that I'm in right now is 640 by 200 pixels. And you see I've got a big border on the top of the screen. I have a border on the bottom that I can't mouse down to. Amiga allows you to set an overscan area to actually allow you to use more of the screen. I'm going to drag these little boxes out. Now my screen, instead of being 640 by 200, is 724 pixels by 241 pixels. It's also very useful for video work. I click Use, and it should change the text size for overscan. Use. Now, look how suddenly this takes up much more of the screen. I can move my windows down. I actually have a lot more screen real estate that I can use. You will sacrifice some precious chip memory when you do that. Like in this case, I used another maybe 20 kilobytes of chip memory, but it's worth it overall in order to get more screen real estate. Printer allows you to change which printer you're using. In this case, I don't have any printers. I would have to drag them from my devs or my storage folder into my devs folder in order for my printer list to populate. But you can change what kind of printer you use, what kind of interface it's using, what kind of paper it's using. Screen mode, terribly important. This is where you can change the screen resolution. By default, if you've got an OCS Amiga, you're going to find just your NTSC or just your PAL screen modes, which is fine. But because I have an enhanced chipset, I have a lot of other screen modes I can access. In this case, here is an 800 by 600 screen mode. Now a screen mode that we can use. This is productivity. This is a 640 by 480 mode at 31.44 kilohertz. This mode will work in only 4 colors, but this will display on a standard VGA monitor. It does not need to be a multi-sync monitor. Any 31.5 kilohertz monitor will display this mode just fine. The caveat is, number one, it's a little slower, and number two, it won't work with games. It's only going to work with Workbench and Workbench available programs. So it is useful, but not maybe as useful as it could be. We'll just go back to regular high-res mode. We'll go to 16 color mode here. You can set your date and your time on your Amiga here. It's only going to remember it if you have a real-time clock on it, which I don't. My battery's dead. You can change your input options. Basically, you're going to be changing your mouse speed, your keyboard speed, and your keyboard type, which kind of keyboard that you're using. Palette allows you to change your color palette for different items. So for instance, if you want to change window colors, icon colors, that kind of thing, you can go in and you can change your colors here and even choose from any of the standard 4096 colors the Amiga uses, or 16 million colors if you have an AGA Amiga. Printer graphics just allows you to change some settings for printing out graphics. Under serial, you're going to be able to change your serial preferences, the speed of your serial port if you're doing data transfers. And lastly, Workbench pattern. You can create incredibly annoying Workbench patterns that make you go blind when you try and look at your screen now. You can also set an image as your Windows background. Workbench and the Amiga OS is an incredibly powerful multitasking operating system that can do some really fantastic things. For example, let's open up Personal Paint, which is made by Aeon. So now we're at a completely different screen resolution. Now let's open up a word processor. This is ProWrite. This is a test. Okay, now as I mentioned before, the Amiga is a completely multitasking operating system. So while I have Personal Paint running in the background and ProWrite running in the background, I can go in and do anything I want to in Workbench. To swap between the programs, you can use left Amiga M and N to swap between the programs. So there's the Amiga Workbench, Personal Paint, ProWrite. Now these are all working at different resolutions. Workbench is 640 by 200, Personal Paint is 640 or 320 by 200, and ProWrite's probably, let's change this one to a nice big resolution. Here's one of the cool things about the Amiga. You can take the screen, drag it down, and see what's going on in the back. So there's Workbench, there's Personal Paint, and there's ProWrite. These can be at 3 completely different resolutions, and the Amiga can display them all at one time. You can't even do that on a modern PC. It's just incredible. Now here's an example of multitasking. We're going to load up an image, and we're going to load up clown. While it's loading the image and processing it, we can go back and we can type away in Professional Paint or in ProWrite while it's still doing its thing. So we're still loading the image and counting the pixels there, and I'm typing away in ProWrite. The Amiga doesn't care, completely multitasking. So it's doing its thing. We could go in here, we could start printing our page, we could run spelling check on our page, we could go back to Workbench, modify some files here, go back and check on our Paint program anytime we want to and see what it's doing. So I hope this little tutorial has been helpful for people who are either getting back into the Amiga after a long hiatus or maybe just playing with it for the first time. Over the next couple of weeks, I'll do more tutorials on digging deeper into Workbench, digging deeper into the shell and things like AREX, and getting more and more capability and power out of your Amiga, including using some free tools that really enhance the power of your machine. Don't forget, Amiga OS 3.1 is still available for purchase, and Amiga OS 3.1.4 is still available for purchase. Don't copy that floppy. But until next time, this is Doug from 10 Minute Amiga Retrocast, signing out.